and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Martin, welcome to the show, and I am currently in Russia, and it's daytime for you if you're listening on the East Coast, and it's the regular time for me, Moscow time, which is 8 o'clock p.m. on Wednesday. Thanks so much for listening, and a lot of Europeans are in the YouTube, watching YouTube live right now. I have Alejandro live from Phoenix coming up in just one moment, and so I want to thank you who support the show. All it takes is a couple bucks a month or more, and all that information's on our website. You can listen to the full shows, of course, on YouTube or on podcastufo.com on Wednesdays while I'm in Russia, and that's till the first part of August or the last part of July, from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's when you can watch it. And it's also still playing on the Dark Matter Digital Network on Thursday evenings, and that's 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. All right, Alejandro, how are you? Thanks so much for joining us live.
Hello, comrade.
Hello, comrade.
Does anybody actually say comrade out there in Russia?
Nobody talks to anybody.
Have you heard that?
It's just the eye. They give you the eye. That's all you get.
Nobody.
Yeah.
Is it a good eye or a bad eye?
It's the stink eye, as they say.
Oh.
Yeah, that's in the area I'm in. Now, when you're walking down to the Black Sea, it's a little more, pleasant, I should say. A little nicer. Yeah.
People are on vacation down there, I guess.
Well, yeah, but mostly there's no Americans at all. I'm the only American. They are from other countries. They're from Turkey and a few other places. There's quite a few of them that come here, but very, very few Americans. I'm the first American a lot of people meet here. I'm about, I think it's about 800 miles south of Moscow. If you look at Moscow and then you look at the big pond, the Black Sea, it's just almost a direct line south from there.
So you're representing Americans for Russia.
That's right. And I've tried out last year when I was trying to get some local Russian people on, because there's quite a bit of UFO sightings in the area here.
Yeah.
And I had I finally was able to communicate with one person, and he said, my English is really, really bad. I won't do it. And I was also trying to get someone to do the Dyatlov Pass incident. That's a Russian.
Yeah.
Same deal. The guy said he wasn't comfortable with his English. So,
bummer.
But we'll see. I got
don't have to be that worried about it. That's too bad.
I know. I still got quite a bit of time here. You never know what'll happen. And,
you know what? That's something that's unique about Americans, is that in other countries they make fun of each other if they don't speak their language well. In America, we kind of like it. We kind of think it's quaint, and we love accents. We don't really make fun of people so much if they don't know our language that well.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll either think it's quaint and like it, or hate them and wish that they leave our country and threaten to bomb them.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, so it's either way.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess we should continue with UFO. So this is kind of cool. Now you can see me. This is a shirt I got from Tom DeLonge himself.
Oh, really? Let me just scoot the camera over a little bit here. Okay.
So this is like the I think secret machine symbol. I'm not sure what that is. Very simple. That's all that's on it.
And that's his own design and everything?
I guess so.
Yeah. And he sent it to you. Wow.
Yeah, so that was awfully nice.
Yeah. So that's great. Now, is there ever any possibility that you're going to be able to interview him about?
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, you're working on it, I'm sure. Yeah.
All right. I mean, I would like to kind of wait for this supposed announcement to come out, or something really juicy. So hopefully that'll happen at some point.
Yeah, I know. That was about 4 or 5 months ago. He said he had a major announcement to make at some point. And was this after or before the WikiLeaks went out?
This was after. This was at our conference that he made this announcement.
Oh, that's right.
That something was going to come out. And then we did a video because we gave him an award, and that video with him talking to us went viral. And so it got all over the place. So people really knew about this supposed announcement that was supposed to come. But it still hasn't come. So.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. So what else is going on? There's a few things going on. I mean, I was on your show on Monday, and we seemed to eat up about a whole hour's worth of news. Yeah,
we had a lot of stuff. It wasn't quite that long, I don't think. Maybe these things drag on to you. I like doing this, and I like talking with you, so time flies, but you don't necessarily have to feel the same way. But yeah, there's a few stories here. So I think it's been a couple weeks. One of them, I don't think we've talked about this wow signal thing with on your show.
No, we didn't. No.
And I think this is really cool because essentially the wow signal, a lot of your listeners probably know what it was, but in 1977, scientists who were working on the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence project, commonly known as SETI, were listening to radio signals like the movie Contact because they're hoping to hear aliens, and they've been doing this for years. Well, the only interesting signal that they've received is called the wow signal. That was in 1977, and this signal, nobody's been able to figure out what it is. And of course, SETI scientists, the most well-known being Seth Shostak, are very conservative. So, if they're saying something's mysterious, then, that's something to listen to, I think. That's interesting.
Right.
The signal was captured in Ohio State at the Big Air Telescope, it's called. And nobody's really challenged yet. People kind of come up with ideas. But a guy named Antonio Paris and a colleague of his posted a paper in the Journal of the Washington Academy of Science. So this is like a peer-review type of thing. Antonio is an astronomer at St. Petersburg College. His co-author is Evan Davies. But what's interesting about Antonio is he's also a UFO researcher. So some of your listeners may even be familiar with his paranormal research group. He used to be a MUFON investigator and involved with MUFON. I think he might have even been on the STAR team and everything. But I've had him on my show talking about this and other UFO stuff. But yeah, this paper he and his colleague wrote got in the news all over the place because they were saying that they figured out what it is. It was actually these two comets. So comets do emit radio signals, and at the same frequency the wow signal was found. And there were two comets in the area that people didn't know about in 1977. So they're like, they didn't know back then that there were comets right there. We know that now, so that's what it must have been. However, the SETI scientists, interestingly, have said, no, this still could be alien. It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah, you'd never expect them to say that.
Yeah, people expect SETI scientists to be debunkers, but in this case, they're like, no, we still don't know what it is. They could be aliens. Their main arguments were that the comets are not exactly in the right place. The signal was too powerful for it to have been that, and that this radio telescope, the Big Ear, has two listening devices that go around, and one follows the other. And if they were comets, then it would have been caught on the first horn and the second horn. That's what they call them, horns. But it was only caught on the first, not by the second, which was only like a minute or so after the first. So it turned off. And their argument is that if the comets were emitting that sound, they wouldn't just turn off like that. And Antonio says that's right. They are right that it wouldn't turn off like that. But he suspects, has not proven, but suspects that the Big Air Telescope was not working correctly, and that's what is to blame. But Seth Shostak has actually written an article disagreeing with Antonio Paris and his colleague. And also, the man who first discovered the signal did an interview with Life Science, who also says he disagrees for the same reason Shostak does. They did interview Antonio Paris on this Life Science article, and he did say they are going to do more work studying comets and how comets emit this radio signal at this frequency to learn more about that, because people don't know much about that. So he still holding on to the idea that it's possibly the comets are the answer, and he's still seeking to study that conclusion to see if he can maybe prove that he was right in the first place.
Do you think that they have been studying that area of the sky, or I don't want to say the sky, that star, system or anything, since this has happened on a regular basis?
Yeah, you do hear about stories because the WOW signal is so popular. You do hear about stories where people do try to listen to that area to try to get a signal. It was only heard once, and that's part of the problem is that we've got this one weird signal. We don't know what it is. It was so strong. It seems like it could have been directed to us. But in order for it to be confirmed as something more anomalous, they need to record it on several occasions, and they've only received it this once. So who knows? Yeah. What if it was like a watch out, watch out behind you? There's aliens headed your way, and then the aliens destroyed the people who were trying to warn us.
I think you're watching too much Independence Day or something.
Yeah, Doctor Who.
Yeah. Right.
So that's a really cool story. I love that story because one, it involves a UFO researcher who is an astronomer and a very credible person. That's why it's taken seriously. In fact, a lot of the science magazines, those who follow space science, probably read about this because it's been all over the place. And two, we have the SETI scientists like Seth Shostak on what is kind of our side, defending the possibility that some of this could be extraterrestrial. So that's pretty funny, too. So,
it is. Yeah.
Cool story.
Right. So what else is happening?
So, moving on. Your good old buddies at the Midnight in the Desert, who you used to work with the station there, but they've released this MJ-12 document, alleged MJ-12 document. Of course, I personally feel all the MJ-12 documents are hoaxes. And the very first one is an admitted hoax, something people deny. But you could read about that, actually, in this story I posted about it. So Heather Wade took over for Art Bell on his much-anticipated podcast that Art Bell started, but unfortunately only did a few episodes before quitting yet again. So Heather Wade took over. She says she received some MJ-12 documents from an anonymous source, but someone she said she knows and trusts. She posted those documents and said she's looking into it. She's asked Stanton Friedman to look into it, but she's seen no evidence of fakery. I think she's being genuine. Some people are attacking her, but I personally don't believe there's any reason to. She's just being honest and posting these stories. However, practically everybody disagrees that there's not evidence of fakery in these documents. Even Stephen Bassett had sent out an email saying, well, these might be real or disinformation, and then soon after sent out an email saying, no, this is a complete hoax. And pretty much everybody else has come forward and said that. Friedman has not come forward with his opinion. But as I write in the story about it, the documents are pretty silly. Especially there's a section where they allegedly interview an alien, and the conversation is really kind of goofy.
Yes, Yeah, I was just saying I had Kevin Randall. We discussed this last week on the show for the entire show, basically, or most of the show. But also, just to let you know, I have coincidentally I booked this months ago, but I do have Stanton Friedman on next week. So
interesting.
We'll be exploring that topic even deeper.
Yeah. Well, read my article and look at some of my other arguments if you.
Yes, I did check it out. Yes. And
Stan's a fun person to debate with because he loves debating. He just loves it, and he's got a great attitude. He does not hold grudges or get upset with people. He's just really cool. He has debated Seth Shostak quite a bit, and he still admires Shostak very much. So even though he feels he's wrong. But the other big news then, moving on, and we'll see if you had a guest and talked about this, and these UK files. So we've been waiting for these UK UFO files for literally years. So how this came about is John Burroughs, who is one of the Rendlesham Forest witnesses. Of course, he saw a UFO in the UK on a base that was on lease to the U.S. Air Force. He was a U.S. Air Force security officer. And he was sent to go out in the forest and see this UFO. Very famous case. Of course, we've had him on the show multiple times. I'm sure you have as well. But John Burroughs has been doing research on Rendlesham, and he found these documents that he asked to see. This was back while the UK government was releasing all of their UFO documents. So they said, well, we're releasing all our UFO documents, so they'll be in there eventually, so you're just going to have to wait. Well, the last batch of UFO documents came out, and they weren't in there. And allegedly, this was all their documents, but Burroughs knew better. So he asked them to release them, and they just kind of ignored him. Finally, when someone else who had read about Burroughs' efforts in the UK had asked about them, the UK responded to this person officially on their website, FOIA website, and said, oops, we did find some more UFO files, and we'll release those as soon as possible, but it could take us 9 months. That was in 2014, and here we are in 2017, finally getting to see these files, but it's not that easy. They've been tricky about it. They have released the headlines of the files very secretively. They didn't make much fanfare about it. And you can't see these files unless you live in London or you live in the UK near, and you can drive to West London in the town of Kew, where they house these documents and actually look at them physically. So very strange the way they've rolled them out. The reason I say secretively, because in the past, they had previously let Nick Pope know. Of course, he used to investigate UFOs for the UK. They would let him know that they're going to release files. They would prepare a press release, make the files available online, and then Nick and others would do interviews about them. So they were very open about them. And but this time they tried to be sneaky. They didn't notify Nick Pope. He had to guess. And Nick Pope is kind of like, hey, they're trying to be sneaky, so I'm going to try to get this out there as much as possible. So he's been interfacing with a lot of the media, and there have been a lot of media stories now about this, and more is coming out about these files. And there are some interesting cases, such as a case where there was an object that was seen and caught on radar, but the Royal Air Force told people to ignore it. And so that's making some headlines. You could read about that. Nick Pope said that was an interesting case, and it was during a flap, and there were a lot of other sightings. But that in the end, the Royal Air Force said it was probably, at least when it came to the radar, that it was probably a church spear that had made a fall. So, and buildings can't do that, but of course buildings are stay still. Yeah. And because of weather conditions, that's why sometimes you may see them and sometimes you won't. But, buildings don't move, and it's something they probably would be aware of because, it's something they would see occasionally in that area.
Wow.
So really interesting. It's great that we finally received these files. Hopefully there will be some media pressure on the UK government to digitize these and release them. Otherwise, we'll just have to wait. And it's harder. In the United States, you can go to an archives, scan a government file that isn't available online, and make it available because as taxpayers, we all have rights to those files, and we can use them at will. In the UK, it's different. The government keeps copyright, so you can't share willy-nilly their stuff. Violation of their copyright. So people have to actually typically pay to get those files to be able to use them.
Wow. And so, like even a news source, if a news source wanted to reference a file, would they actually need copyright?
They can reference a file, they can quote it, and I'm sure you can quote it at length, but you can't post that actual file. You can post a link to the file in the government UK government archives. But, a lot of us in the UFO field have been kind of pushing the line when it comes to these UFO files. But nobody has, that I know has been told to take anything down. I haven't heard of that. So I don't know how aggressive they are in policing that. But that's the rule. They do warn you when you go, and even when you download these, there's a warning that says, hey, we have copyright. So watch it, bub.
How about that? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we ran a little bit long. It's 20 minutes in. But hey, thanks so much. Can you hang in a minute and you can say hi to Phil?
Sure, that'd be great.
You know, because actually, I really want to make sure I can reach him. Now, I had him on just a few minutes ago, but let's see.
Phil is a regular contributor to OpenMinds.tv.
Oh, he is. Okay.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I have a question I wanted to ask him today.
All right, I want to see if I can get him on, because right now it's only letting me add him as Skype, and I really need to call his number. Let me I'll give it a try, see what happens.
Philip Mantle. Philip Mantle, please come in. This is the United States.
Yes.
But is that Pink Floyd like that? Remember that?
Are you sure you're doing the right one? Phil? I see.
Yeah.
Hi, Phil. Is this your Skype or is this your phone number?
It's Skype.
It's a Skype. Okay, just one quick minute. I'll hang up, but Alejandro Rojas is with us here, and he had a question for you. Go ahead, Alejandro.
Oh, hey, Phil. How you doing?
I'm all right. Nice to see you.
Good. So I'm sure this is something you'll talk about with Martin, but I was wondering if you had written an article on the Roswell witness in Irina's new book that you published, which I'm sure you'll talk about, because I would love to post an article on that whole thing. So, yeah, and it's great because I love, you contribute, and I love your contribution, so that would be fun.
Yep, you shall have it this evening. No problem.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, you guys have a great show.
All right, Alejandro. Thanks a lot, and we'll be talking to you next week. All right.
Adios.
Bye-bye. Phil, I'm going to see if I can. What I'm going to do is Phil, can you hear me? All right, hang in, everyone. This is a little bit tricky. Here we go. I'm going to see if this will work now. All right. I'll try him one more time here. We were having trouble with the Skype, and so I just wanted to. It's not letting me do it in another way. Here, just a minute. Here we go. Okay, this should ring fine. Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Hello.
Hey, Phil, how you doing?
I'm fine, mate. Thank you.
Hey, can you get into your phone a little bit? It's a little bit quiet, and I want to make sure everybody can hear you just fine.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. So I might need you to speak up just a little. It could be just on my end. It may be just the volume, but I just want to make sure we all hear you very clearly. So thanks. You've been on the show a number of times. This is great because while I'm in Russia, I'm doing the show earlier, and I get to speak with people like yourself in the UK, and always like to have you on. And I think this may be the first time we've actually done the show live, perhaps.
I think it is. Yeah, it's normally recorded, which is, it's fine, but it's all, it's better. It's always better when it's live, Martin.
I think so. So for the person that's not familiar with you, even though, as I mentioned, you've been on a number of times, can you just, you have quite a really strong background when it comes to UFOs. Can you just kind of, in a nutshell, talk about your background and what got you interested?
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in all things paranormal, even as a young boy. And sort of in my late teens, the subject of UFOs emerged, and that caught my interest. And just by chance, when I was 20 years old, an organisation started here in Yorkshire, where I live, and it was called the Yorkshire UFO Society. And it had been founded by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Some people may recognise Graham's name because Graham went on to edit UFO magazine and publish it for many, many years very successfully. From there, I stayed got a lot of years, learned all kinds of things, moved on to a national organisation, which was the British UFO Research Association. I served them in many ways as conference organiser, press officer, and director of investigations. I was also the MUFON rep for England for a number of years as well. And I went on to do a whole host of things, Martin, you know, quite by chance. I think I class myself as being very fortunate. I really do. But it all began, you know, back in those days, around about 1980, when I first met Graham and Mark Birdsall. That's my beginnings.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that's great. Hey, I wanted to let you know that we do have a chat room going here, and so we may be getting questions coming in from that as we go along here. And also, we have a bunch of questions that came into our forum over the last couple of days. Well, actually, I think they came in today. And so, you know, I can jump into those questions, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of addressed here in the first question that I see. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the British tabloids, just why they seem to be going gangbusters in the UFOs these days, and how much, what's your opinion on if that's hurting, you know, the official, the stories that are out there, when I don't mean official, but the more solid stories are out there. So the first question here is, do you think there were many, or do you think there were any repercussions from government?
No, I don't. I mean, you know, I've certainly never seen any, and I've never encountered anyone that has. I mean, many years back, I'll give you an example, Martin. We used to have, we formed what we called a UFO hotline. Sounds fantastic. And this is the days before the internet. But basically all it was a telephone answering machine. And it had a dedicated telephone number, and we sent that number here, there, and everywhere. Like I said, no internet, and it used to amaze me where the actual telephone number used to end up, because when people would call us, I would ask them, as a matter of course, where did you get the number from? Mm-hmm. And, you know, there were days when if you rang the Ministry of Defence in Whitehall in London, they would have given, to report a UFO sighting, they would have given you our telephone number.
Wow.
And that is the truth. We got it from RAF bases, police stations, because one of the things we used to try and put into it when we sent these things out, certainly to official bodies, we kind of pander to them. We'd say, look, surely you've got better things to do, you know, because most of the time if somebody contacted them, they would fob them off anyway. So it was far better that we dealt with it, and that seemed to work on an awful lot of occasions. And the Ministry of Defence would have no exception. And I was astonished. I didn't know. I just got a gentleman ring me one day, and I asked the question, "Where did you get our telephone number from?" And he said, "I rang the MOD, and they gave me it." So I contacted the MOD just to back that up, and they said, "Yeah, that was correct." You know, so no repercussions from anywhere military, either with investigating the subject or publishing things about it. I've never seen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. All I'm saying is I've never come across it, and I don't know anyone that has.
Now, what are some of the big cases? Now, I was reading somewhere along the line today. I think it was a 1996 photograph that really intrigued you. You were really looking into it. What are the details of that one?
Yeah, I mean, what I've been trying to do, Martin, is because I have a bit of time on my hands at the moment. Literally right next to me is a filing cabinet, and it's full mainly of reports and files, and then I have 3 boxes full of items as well, most of which either I researched or investigated myself, or with colleagues, or other colleagues have sent me these for whatever reason at the time. And there is no way on earth I can remember all this lot. You know, it's not filed in any particular order either, Martin. It's just filed away to protect it, to keep it safe. And some of the items I've come across, as soon as I see them, I remember them. One of which was the photograph you mentioned, and it was sent in with very little information. but it's just one of those little things that intrigued me. It actually came to me sort of second hand. It had been sent to a newspaper first, and they contacted me and said, "Can you help us with this, Philip?" And there wasn't an awful lot we could do, to be honest, because despite the gentleman giving us his full name and address and telephone number, he wasn't very forthcoming with extra information. But if you go way back, there's a series of black and white photographs at Trinidad Island. So you get the island, and you've got this hat-shaped UFO film taken by the Navy, and this object in this particular thing in 1996 resembles that very closely, although we haven't got any foreground and background details in. So one of the reasons I'm going through this archive material is to try and make it available to people who've never clapped eyes on it, which is just about anybody, Martin, because, again, when we investigated it, there was very little outlet for us to publish it anyway. So, and if we did, it was in publications that only had a very small circulation, so virtually no one has seen it. So I've always been in favour of putting things into the public domain if you can, and people can help you research it. Certainly these days you can put something online and it can go around the world in a blink of an eye.
That's right.
So make it available. People can hopefully help shed some more light on it, or not, as the case may be. And that's not just photographs, that's, different types of sightings, particular. I mean, what I started to do is, believe it or not, I pulled out a few cases that I remembered. In fact, I picked 3 out. I won't go into the details of them. And again, these were all cases that were pre-internet days. So I wrote to the 3 witnesses in question, and the first letter I sent out to the gentleman was still living there, still at the same address, remembered speaking to me originally, and I just clarified a few items with him. And I mean, I'm talking about 25 years or more since that was submitted, and he's still there, and still remembers the incident and so on. Similarly, another gentleman and his wife that I contacted, they didn't live at the address, but a family member did, and they passed the letter on. And he absolutely refused to speak about the incident anymore, not because of any fright or ridicule. It's just, I remember interviewing him. I went to speak to him and his wife in person, and it terrified the living daylights out of him, Martin, and he just did not want to revisit it. Mm-hmm. So I accepted that, and changed the subject, because he remembered who I was, and had a chat about something else, what had happened family-wise in between now and then, and left it alone. If the gentleman doesn't want to speak, that's fair enough. You have to accept that. So that's what I've been trying to do anyway, and I'm still on with it.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Well, I really appreciate the cases where the people really don't want to talk about it. A little bit, it just adds, in my opinion, only, it just adds more to the credibility, because, they went through something that's horrific and they really don't want to talk about it. And, to me, it just kind of alleviates any factors, any red flags, so to speak.
I agree with you. I mean, I wrote my first book back in 1994, and it's all about missing time cases and cases of abduction in Britain. Now, one gentleman, I'll call him David, that's not his real name. I went to speak to him. He lived on the west coast of Wales, at a place called Pwllheli. And he was only a young chap, and the basic story is, I'll quickly outline it. He was out of work at the time. He'd been to a friend's birthday, and he was walking home on what he called the main road. We wouldn't call it a main road. There was nothing there. And in the field up ahead, he could see a light. Now, part of him told him to go and take a look, but another part of him said, don't go. Anyway, we walked up in some bushes by this field, and he could see this object that looked a bit like the space shuttle, to be honest, on the ground. And then he felt a hand on his shoulder, and next thing he knew, he was on board this thing, lying on a bed. There's lots more to it. I'm just giving the bit. But in those days, he had a Walkman, a cassette.
Yes.
And they took this cassette from him, and put it in a panel, and he played the rock music. He was a rock music fan, and he says it was the most bizarre thing you could ever dream of. You know, there's this otherworldly environment with this rock music blaring out. Anyway, he was eventually, you know, returned. He was actually found by a police officer on patrol in a police car, staggering down the road. He wasn't drunk. Well, I said to him, well, you bet to your friend's birthday party. You must have had a drink. He says, Philip, we were all unemployed. You know, we didn't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got home, he lived with his mom. She was a single parent. And he was absolutely terrified. He told his mom everything. He could remember it all. She went to the library the next day and found one UFO book, and it mentioned a UFO organisation called Contact International, and they were down in Oxford. She's nowhere near Pwllheli. So she managed to get a phone number for them and spoke to them, and she said, we'll ring you back and we'll arrange to, you know, come out and see you, or we'll get somebody there. So the following night, you know, David goes to bed. He is still terrified. And when I say terrified, I use the word incorrectly. So what his mum did, it can now start to snow heavily. She literally put him in the back of the car, got this address, got a map, and drove to Oxford, which is a long drive, and knocked on this fella's door in the morning. And I know the gentleman in question, and there was David in the back of the car, you know, shivering and quaking. Cutting a long story short, David didn't have any regressive hypnosis. He had to have hypnotherapy to relieve him of the fear and the nightmares he had about this encounter. Now, I interviewed him twice. You talked to him. By this time, you know, he'd got a job, he got a girlfriend, still liked rock music. And you talked to him about his job and his girlfriend. He was like any young fella, but as soon as you changed the direction and started to talk about his encounter, he became nervous and agitated. And I didn't realise it. I asked him if he'd take me to the location, and he did. I have a photograph of him stood there, and he stood there like a piece of wood. He's terrified. So when I wrote the book, one of the things I did, I sent it to a number of the witnesses in the book, and I sent it to David, and he thanked me. And he was still that scared. He didn't actually read the book for 3 years.
Wow.
He left it sat there unopened. Although he thanked me for it, he didn't read it for 3 years. And, you know, that just shows you what kind of... I know those things are kind of rare. That's not a typical, but it terrified the living daylights out of him. And for me, like you said, Martin, that, you know, adds a huge degree of credibility. Because sometimes it's not all about what the witness claims they may or may not have seen. It's actually about the witness themselves. That's right. That's the area of concentration. So that's just a couple of instances. Yeah.
One of the things I did mention, so I'd like to kind of get this part of the show out of the way because I don't want to forget about it, and that is I had wanted to, or started out wanting to ask you why there is, do you think it's the clickbait, as they call it, clickbait, UFO is such a hot topic for the tabloids in the UK in the last, I want to say in the last couple of years especially. Have you seen this?
Yeah, absolutely, because, you know, online it's packed with advertising. If you access one of these articles, and I've you know, recently I've been involved with articles for the national newspaper that have gone online, and as soon as you log on to it, there's, you know, articles and there's advertisements pop up here, there, and everywhere. You spend the first, you know, minute or so closing down all the pop-ups that seem to get in your face. God, them things annoy me. But there's money to be made out of advertising, and you know, and let's be honest about it, it does attract an audience, and that's what they're all about. Newspapers aren't necessarily, whether they're online or in the traditional print ones, you know, they're there to make money. They're not there necessarily to print the truth. You know, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. You know, it's an old saying. But, you know, it is. I mean, and the interest, as far as the newspapers are concerned, goes up and down. You know, Martin. They used to call it a silly season subject. Mm-hmm. You know, when Parliament was closed and the football season had ended, what we're going to write about now. Oh, yeah, and it always tended to be around about the summertime was the peak of the interest. There was no football, there was no politics, there were no scandals. All right, we'll do a few articles about UFOs. But now, with it being online, it's they can look around and put a story on there instantly. Where you don't even have to have your permission, But also, let's be honest about it. We can use it to our advantage as well. If you're trying to get information about something or promote something or whatever, then you can use it to your advantage. So it does work both ways. But most of the time, it works in favour of the newspaper. So let's just remember that they're there to sell things. They're there to make money. And as long as we understand that, then you know how to treat it.
That's a really good point. And I know a lot of times they will not source their story, or they'll improperly source it, and they will also they'll also just roll with anything that comes out without really looking into it. It's you can tell that it's definitely just definitely for the clicks, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's amazing where they grab it from sometimes, because even the person that's originally written it doesn't know that it's ended up in the Sun or the Daily Mirror or whatever online. Hasn't got a clue. So but that's what it's all about, Martin.
Right. So another question that came in, it says the Rendlesham news story didn't break until 3 years after the actual event. I didn't know it was 3 years, but anyway, do you think there are other incidents that may have occurred but never have been reported to the public in this modern internet age?
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it, and I can give you an example. A friend of mine, sadly no longer with us, was down in the Midlands of the UK, and he was just in a pub one night. This is about, 5 or 6 years ago now. Maybe a little longer. And he was a UFO investigator, but he wasn't there on that. And they were just chatting away at the bar, and the subject came up. And there was a gentleman sat down and said, "Excuse me." And it was an elderly gentleman, and he's, "Can I have a word with you?" Well, it all turned out he was a retired RAF wing commander, OBE. So he was actually got a medal from the Queen as well. And he told them about an incident he'd personally witnessed back in the 1960s. He had the highest security clearance you could have in the RAF, and his security was so high that when the American spy plane came into land in Britain for refueling or whatever, he was notified of it. Now, he was on duty one night, and covered the whole of the UK, and he was also in touch with other both civilian and military radar stations, when he tracked 6 UFOs over mainland Britain, and he came eventually to my colleague told me about this, and I got in touch with him, and he told me the story. He came to lecture at one of our conferences. Was getting on in years then, and he said, I reported it straight away to the powers that be. They ordered me to make an immediate report of it, which he did. And, had it not been for that casual conversation in the pub that night, we would probably never have heard of it. Not only that, this wing commander, he told me about a colleague of his who had a similar sighting, but not on such a grand scale. So he put me in touch with him, and I managed to interview him as well. And this is the curious thing. With the wing commander, we could find no record of it in the MOD's files. I mean, nothing. Now, with his colleague, who was a lower-ranking officer, he had a sighting that they captured on radar, and on the RAF base, they used to have guards around the perimeter. 2 of the guards actually saw it visually as well. So I submitted a request to the MOD. It's curious is the 2 guards, I got their report, but not their superior, not the boss. His report is nowhere in the files at all. So both of those would have gone unknown had it not been for a casual conversation in a pub one night. So your answer to is, are there other incidents out there, large and small? Most definitely, well, without doubt. And who knows what will turn up next?
Yeah. I think he was sort of trying to insinuate a possible cover-up, but I'm not really sure if that.
Well, I mean, it is the duty of all governments to keep secrets.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's not forget that. So, does our government withhold things from us? Yes. We are covered by the Official Secrets Act, which I believe was brought in for the First World War. So it's long out of date. And I'll give you an example. A colleague of mine used to work in a textile mill, and he had to sign the Official Secrets Act. And I thought he was joking. He says, "No, Philip, I have." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, we make, some of the cloth we make is for military dress uniforms." You know?
Jeez.
It's not high-tech, it's just uniforms. But he still had to sign the Official Secrets Act.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, so, yes, they do keep secrets, and I'm sure they keep secret about UFOs. But whether it's secrets that they know more than us, I'm not so sure. But, yes, they do withhold information on a whole host of topics, and that includes UFOs, Martin. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, now, here in the U.S., we have the Federal Aviation, the FAA, and they're very cautious about, discussing any part of UFOs, or, I'm sure you're very familiar with that. What about radar operators in the UK? Are they also regulated, or can you actually speak to those those people that are radar operators and about talk to them about UFOs?
Yeah, I mean, down the years we've not found that there's a specific order that's gone out to all of the civilian air stations saying this is what you must say and what you must not say. It seems to be down to each individual, airport or area that they cover. I also found that with RAF bases and police stations that we used to deal with as well. It was down to whether they could be bothered or not. And so sometimes you will contact a particular airport and ask about what was seen on, or did you have this, or did you have that? And sometimes they'll give you a nice reply, which is just go away, but still nicely. But on other occasions, no, they have cooperated, and so I think it's just take pot luck, really. There doesn't seem to be any one official line. It's different with the military, of course, but certainly with the civilian aviation, I found it a very mixed response. So you just take it as it comes, really. What we tried to do, Martin. Again, the days before the internet, we used to try and build a rapport with our local air bases and civilian air stations, and airports, and build up a kind of a trust with them. And then, if we got a sighting in, we could contact the airport and say, did you have any traffic in this area at that time? Yes or no, please. And they knew we wouldn't pester the living daylights out of them. So, I think sometimes we've forgotten how to do that. We like everything now and instant. It's online. I want it now. And so sometimes that now works against us. But we certainly had a lot of success. I remember speaking to the one of the RAF bases here, and their public relations officer was extremely helpful. Now, whether he had a personal interest or not, we could never find out. But it was just the way it went, and we speak to another RAF base, and they thought we were all a bunch of lunatics. So that's just the way it went. It's up to you to try and prove to them that you weren't, but it's not always that easy.
Yeah, for sure. One of my favorite cases up there, I have a couple of them, of course. Rendlesham Forest is way up there, but is the 2007 Alderney UFO sighting across the...
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Did you have that? To me, I think that is just an amazing sighting. Have you ever looked into that yourself?
Well, again, I did correspond with the pilot.
Oh, you did?
For a while, via email.
Is this Ray? Was it Ray Bauer?
That's the guy. That's the gentleman. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it was investigated by an old friend and colleague of mine who was rather sceptical, I might add. That's called David Clark, or Dr. David Clark. He does have a PhD. In fairness to David, he went on the record saying this is the best witness I've ever spoken to. And that was Captain Ray Bauer. And of course, you know, the air stations involved at the time cooperated quite openly. You know, the Captain Bauer wasn't put under any pressure from anyone anywhere. And we did discuss the possibility of him speaking at one of our conferences that we had at the time. And he wasn't against that idea. He was just a very busy man. You know, he wasn't saying no. He was just saying, oh, you know, I have to work for a living. But they did cooperate, and you know, something was tracked on radar. Whether it was the same as the sighting of Captain Ray Bauer, I'm not entirely sure. You know, you use your own judgment in that respect. But I trust my friend David Clark when he says he's the best UFO witness he's ever spoken to.
Wow! Can you, for the listener that's not familiar with the story, can you kind of go over what exactly happened?
Yeah, well, Captain Ray Bauer was flying a small aircraft, you know, civilian aircraft from mainland Britain across to the Channel Islands. And it's only a short flight. You know, I dare say he could do it with his eyes closed. If people don't know where the Channel Islands are, they lie off the southern part of England. And I'm told they're very beautiful. I've never been there. It's the only part of Britain that was occupied by the Germans during the Second World War. That was the Channel Islands. They are actually closer to France than they are the UK, you know? Yeah. So, you know, inbound to land, he got passengers behind him, of course. He saw this huge, yellow, oblong object in the distance. And when I say huge, I do mean extremely large. Now, Captain Bauer's only, you know, concern was for the safety of his aircraft and his passengers. So he did the necessary, you know, contacting the tower at Alderney, reported what he was seeing. Passengers behind him could hear what was going on. This is only a small aircraft, so they took a look as well, and they could see it. And of course, he reported it officially upon landing, because he thought this was a threat. Whatever it was, he didn't know what it was. He'd never seen anything like this before. I mean, this thing was very, very big, a big oblong. He thought it could be, you know, have a detrimental effect to aircraft in the area, including his own, you know. So that was his primary concern, was the safety aspect. And again, I think that added to his credibility. He didn't say what it was. He just said, I don't know what it was. Never seen, and he'd flown this route, you know, for a long time. It was a regular thing he did. Like I said, he could probably fly with his eyes closed. You know, it was that regular. But his only concern was about the safety of his aircraft and his passengers, and that's why he reported this thing. He thought it could be something of a hazardous nature. And again, that adds to his, in my opinion, adds to his, his credibility. He didn't call it an alien spaceship or a flying saucer or anything like that. He just said, this is what I saw. Never seen anything like it. Something was tracked on radar, you know, in the same area. And you make of it what you will. You know, as simple as that.
I think somewhere I was reading he thought it could possibly be a mile wide or something like that.
Absolutely, it was huge. That was an estimate. I mean, that was one of the difficulties he had, was estimating its exact size. I mean, if you'd seen another aircraft, it could have told you exactly how big it was, because he knew all the aircraft that flew in and around there. He hadn't just flown little aeroplanes. So, but this thing was huge, humongous, and he had a lot of difficulty, you know, trying to estimate the size of this thing. Because, let's face it, if you're a pilot, there's nothing that we have that flies is that big. You can't say it was as big as a X or a Y or a Z, because they don't exist. Yeah. So it was quite remarkable, yes. And of course he went public with it. He didn't suffer anything by going public. He wasn't ridiculed. You know, you could tell by speaking to the gentleman. He was genuinely concerned. His observation was supported by the ground crew and the radar and his passengers who were sat behind him, you know, looking over his shoulder, who could also see it. And, all it did by going public was, in my opinion, you know, raise his credibility. He had more to lose by going public than he did to keep quiet. But again, think about his concern was the safety aspect. So surely the public at large should know about this.
Yeah.
And it is a fascinating case. It really is.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember how long they were watching this, and if it moved in any type of direction?
No, it was several minutes. I mean, from the mainland to the Channel Islands in an aircraft. It's only a short jaunt. It's only taking a long time to swim it, but to fly, it's only a short jaunt. But they did see it. They have it there for a number of minutes. It wasn't just there and gone in the blink of an eye. He was able to give good directions to the ground crew, and tell them where it was, what it looked like, how large he thought it was. You looked for other aircraft in the area. It wasn't a quick thing. It wasn't over in a matter of seconds. Mm-hmm. It was certainly for minutes. And when you're on a flight that doesn't take that long, minutes is a good chunk of your flying time.
Right. Now, going back to your book, I believe that's where this question comes from, the Once Upon a Missing Time. You interviewed an abductee that you called Jane. Was that in that book? Well,
Jane was in Without Consent. And what I did, I wrote a novel, called Once Upon a Missing Time. And I actually used some of the information from Without Consent to build up a fictional account of an abduction account, and Jane was in Without Consent. I told you earlier about the UFO hotline we started up. Mm-hmm. Now, Jane was the very first person to ever contact us on it, because where I lived in West Yorkshire, to get it up and running, I did an article for my local newspaper, and they put the UFO hotline telephone number in. First lady on it was a lady called Jane, and she just said, I had some sightings a few years ago, left her name and telephone number. So I rang her, and she didn't live that far from me, so I thought, rather than talk all day on the phone, can I come and have a chat with you? So she said yes. I made an appointment, went to see Jane. She was, she was the same age as me, in her 20s. Mm-hmm. Had a partner and had a young child. She was a housewife, and as we're chatting, she told me about some sightings she had several years earlier when she was only 16. And then as this conversation progressed, she then began to tell me about close encounter experiences where she was living now, not 6 years prior to that, now and then, in the present tense. And the initial encounter, Jane was awoken at night, and these strange beings were in her bedroom, and somehow they took her to a field that lies behind the housing estate where she lives. And I've been there, and there's nothing there. There's a factory there, and that's it. But in this field was this large object. She remembers walking towards it, but not actually going in it, but she remembers being in it, and she said she was given something to drink, something to eat that looked like, you call it candy, we call them sweets, and she was made to undress, and she was put into a bath, although there was no water there, but she said this bath seemed to have been made just for her. It fitted her body perfectly, and then she was returned, and she described these beings as the small grey creatures that a lot of people are familiar with. There's a lot more information to it than that, but this was just one of a series of encounters that were ongoing. So what I did, again, this is before the days of the internet. I transcribed the conversation I had with her, because I tape recorded it. I printed it off, and I sent it to, God rest his soul, he's no longer with us, Bud Hopkins.
Oh, yeah. In
New York. I knew Bud, I was on good terms with Bud, to get his opinion on it, and he, bless him, he came back to me and asked for said, ask her this, Philip, right? He gave me some questions to ask. In one of her other encounters that she related, she speculated that she thought she was pregnant. But the fetus was removed, and she was shown this half alien, half human baby. But this had hair. And she said, if you ever buy a child's doll, one of the cheap ones, they have this awful hair on them. She described the hair as looking like that. Now, Bud was only just writing about this kind of thing. He called this the smart baby syndrome. And Jane was here, a housewife, and with no disrespect, she had no education. She wasn't,
So that's it for the end of the show. I want to thank you so much. This is the free part. You're welcome to support us for $2 or more per month to help us out, and you can listen to the full show plus archives. You're welcome to do that. All the information is on podcastufo.com. And next week we have Stanton T. Friedman on. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things, including the recently released document, what he thinks about it. So check back with us next week if you want to listen live. It's 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's actually where I'm at Moscow time. I'm not in Moscow, but south of Moscow, and that is 8 to 10 p.m. Moscow time. All right, so we'll be back next week. Keep your eyes to the sky. Dos Vidania.